If we come across the need to analyze the nitty-gritty detail that happens between a browser client and a web server for whatever reason, we simply are curious, we're trying to troubleshoot something, or we're looking into a vulnerability that might be happening on either side, we can use an amazing tool set called Burp Suite. Let's begin. I'd like you to go back in the time machine with me and remember that moment when you first learned about the TCP/IP protocol suite. Pretty awesome stuff. We have the application layer up here with things like FTP and HTTP, etc. And then we have the transport layer with things like TCP and UDP. And then we have the internet layer where we have IP. And then we have the data link connection and the physical down here. So there's the data link and then the physical, where we actually transmit the bits, whether it's over fiber, over copper, over radio frequency, we're sending out those bits in some fashion. Well, let's talk about an HTTP application. Now, we know that when a customer sits at a computer and they type in www.cbtnuggets.com, they press enter, what do they expect? And I know they expect some fantastic training that's entertaining and engaging. Besides that, they expect a response from that web server. So the actual program they're running invokes HTTP, which gets encapsulated in TCP, and that gets encapsulated in IP and it gets sent off. Now, TCP has its three-way handshake that it does and all that magic. But you know what? There's a lot that goes on at this application layer. A lot of HTTP requests and methods. And when we go to a single website, we could have actually dozens of TCP sessions being established to pull down that content so we can view it on our computer. Now, how does that relate to the world of penetration testing and security testing? Well, if we are building a web-based application, or we want to check to see the security and the details of a web-based application, we need some visibility into the specific calls at the application layer with what the heck is really going on. One amazing tool that is free and it's included in Backtrack and Kali is something called the Burp Suite, or as its friends call him, Burp. Now, you got to be pretty brave to name your product Burp, but this is an amazing product. There's two flavors. There's a free version, which has a lot of the functionality, and then there's also a professional version where you can purchase a license for it, where it unlocks all the additional bells and whistles. But here's the basics. It is a web application security toolkit. It has a proxy functionality. So here's what we do. So here's our Backtrack machine, or it could be Kali, either way. And we're going to run Burp Suite. So we launch it here, and it's a proxy. Now, what does a proxy do for a living? A proxy takes requests from clients and forwards them onto their final destination. So what we do is we run Burp Suite right here on our Backtrack system, and then we open up a browser on the same computer, and we tell our browser, we're not doing a man-in-the-middle attack on somebody else, but we're actually taking our own browser and telling our browser to go ahead and use Burp Suite as its proxy server. So any traffic we generate will intentionally go through Burp Suite so we can analyze it. We can see all the requests, the replies, we can pause it, we can intercept those requests, we can replay them back in different manners to test the response and the reaction from the web server based on different types of requests going out. So it's an absolutely awesome tool to have in our tool belt if we want to look at the nitty-gritty details for HTTP. So let's imagine we've opened up a browser, we're going through the Burp proxy on purpose on that same Backtrack system, and we look at the results and we say, oh, look at these, 4 or 5 different possible branches that we could go off on. If we wanted to, we could click on one of those branches, one of those sub areas, if you will, of the website, and we could turn on the spider function. The spider is going to crawl across the web. Now, specifically, it's going to crawl in the area that we told it to, and that is going to create quite a bit of request on our part. So we're making a whole bunch of requests that are going to enumerate or elaborate on the details in that area of the website or websites. There's also another really cool feature called a repeater. And the repeater, you can take a request that you've captured and say, you know what, I wonder what would happen if we change these 3 or 4 characters or these variables. And we can actually replay it back with those changes. So for the benefit of seeing what a tiny change in an HTTP request would make based on the response we get back, that's a fantastic tool as well. There's also a scanner function, and that's included in the professional edition. There's also an intruder option, and there's a few other bells and whistles too. Our objective in this nugget is to give you an exposure to this tool and a sample of what it can do and how simple it is to go ahead and use. So let's do a demonstration of Burp. To find it, we're going to open up Backtrack and go to Vulnerability Assessment. web application assessment, and then down under web application proxies. And you know what? Truth be told, you're going to find this in a couple different locations based on the fact that it does multiple things. So besides just on web application proxies, we could also go to web vulnerability scanners, and it is there as well. Either way, it's the same Burp Suite. So we're going to launch it. Now, in Kali, it's going to be in a slightly different location, but you'll be able to find it there as well. Once you launch it, the very first time you run it, it's going to ask you to accept the end user license agreement for Burp Suite. You're going to click on yes, and then you're presented with a menu like this. Now, there's lots of tabs up here. They're going to be very important. Let's go up to proxy. Now, by default, this guy is acting as a proxy server. So what that means is any clients, like a browser on the same machine, who points to this proxy server is going to have all of its traffic sent through this device. Now, it's sort of like a man in the middle on purpose, because we want this device, the Burp Suite, to be able to intercept those commands and then forward them if we want to. We can also change them before we forward them. So by default, intercept is on. And what that means is that your clients, every single request they make, it's not going to be proxied out to the internet until we click on the forward button. So that's very important, because no traffic will flow unless you turn intercept off by clicking that, or if it's on, you click on forward to forward the actual request. Here are the options for the proxy, and by default, it's going to be listening on its loopback interface on port 8080. That is right here. So if we have a client running on the same backtrack system like Firefox or some other browser, we need to set the settings on that browser to point to the loopback on this system still and port 8080. That's to make sure the traffic actually gets to Burp Suite. So there's really not too much else we have to do here by default. Let's go ahead and bring up a client. And by default, we've got Firefox, and we've also got Konqueror. I'll launch Firefox. Virtually every browser has an option for a proxy setting. So on Firefox, to find that, it's under Edit and Preferences, Advanced, and then under Network, and then Settings. And based on the browser that you're using, the proxy settings may be in a slightly different location. So in preparation for this, I set it already to use a manual proxy, point to the loopback address of this backtrack system on port 8080. And what that means is all requests from this browser are going to be sent through Burp. And so Burp will now have the opportunity to intercept each and every call, and we'll have to manually forward it or turn off the intercept mode. So now that that's set up, let's go ahead and launch something. Let's go out to cbtnuggets.com. I want to make sure I don't get anybody in trouble. So I'm going to go to cbtnuggets.com. Now, see how it's working? It says waiting on cbtnuggets.com. The reason it's not coming back right now is because Burp Suite is not allowing it. If we go over to intercept here, this is the actual request. How cool is that? This is the literal request coming from that client. If we want to forward it, we'd click on forward right here, and that forwards that request out to the final destination. So in the background, the client, our own client, our browser, would now get the response from that. So I've gone to one website. That's all we've done so far, but there's lots of objects on that page. If we want to see the details of that, we go up to Target, and this is a list based on what we just did. Well, wait, Keith, let me make sure I'm clear. You went to one website, and yet you have all this information. The ones in bold here are literally pages that I hit. Now, I know I only clicked on cbtnuggets.com, but there's a lot of activity just on that one website. The parts that are in gray represent the fact that we didn't actually visit those sites literally, but we're aware of those sites because of the page that we're currently on. So to analyze this, let's say we click on cbtnuggets.com. Over here on the right, it'll give us all the details of what it actually saw. And check this out. This is the request. So here's our request. We can scroll up and down. And here's the response. Now look at this. On the response page, there's a tab for render. And that means if there was a graphical representation that came back, we can actually see it right here. So we can go ahead and simply click on render, and it should show us any graphical images that were on that page. Sure enough, there's a whole bunch of really fun people. There's James Conrad, Jeremy Chara, Chris Ward, and others, including myself up there on the right. So that's a fantastic way of actually seeing. Now, this is just for fun. You don't want to see the graphic, but we can also see the HTML code. We can see it in hex, the headers, see the raw data for the response. So there's the request, and there's the response. Now, let's say we wanted to change something. If we wanted to, when we initially did that proxy, we had that request, we could have changed content there and then forwarded it to modify that data. But let's say we're trying to play with some parameter or some variable and seeing how that's going to affect a website or a web page. Here's how we could do that. We have all of this history. we can simply go and say, you know what, I wonder what would happen in this request here if I changed this from Firefox 14.01 to Firefox 13.00 or something else, or some other parameter that was actually being sent. To replay that, to actually replay this back to the server, here's what we do. We're going to right click on this guy and say, I want to go ahead and I want to send it to the repeater. And all it's going to do, this tab up here, I want you to notice this tab right there is going to go ahead and go highlighted, meaning there's activity happening there. So I'm going to say send it to the repeater. We have repeater highlight. The repeater tab goes highlighted. We click on that, and now check this out. This is our initial request. So if we want to modify this here at all, for example, let's say we say it's a GET, and we'll say it's HTTP 2.1. Now, I'm not an HTML programmer by any means. So let's go ahead and click on Go, and that's going to submit that up to that web server, and then here's the response that came back. So it looks like me changing that made very little, if any, difference. However, as we're doing testing and application development with the new website, or we're trying to discover new ways of getting that web server to respond to us, we can manipulate virtually anything we want to in the data that's being sent and take a look immediately at the reply back in real time. Another really cool feature is the ability to go ahead and do spider. So for example, on CBT Nuggets, everything that's bolded was actual pages that we hit and got information on. If we scroll down and we have something, for example, licensing, and we wanted to get more information on this, we can simply right click, say go ahead and spider from here. It's going to say, well, this is outside your current scope. Are you sure you want to go for it? And say yes. And take a look at this. The spider tab highlighted indicating it's actually going out and gathering additional information. So it made 39 requests. It got that much data back. And if there was just a really big site where it was crawling and finding all the additional details, it could go ahead and you could have queued up requests based on your specifications of how many requests at the same time can be outstanding. So down here under YouTube. Now YouTube, it's not bolded, which means we're aware of the link. We haven't actually searched it yet. If we wanted to add and get more information about that, we could just go ahead and search it with a right click and say spider this host. It's going to go ahead and start spidering that. Now up here, this spider tab, how it's now yellow or was yellow for a moment. If we click on that, check this out. This is, again, this is not very quiet. We've made that many requests. We've had that much data transferred. And this is how many requests are queued. And this is going to keep going until we've walked that entire branch, which could be absolutely huge. So we might want to go ahead and pause that. So I don't really want to walk the entire branch off YouTube for that. However, if we go back to target, all that additional information is going to show up for us as well. A couple other options that might come in very handy. As far as scope is concerned, you can specify what you want to see or not see in the scope. So if you want to focus on specific elements, you can do that. Also, if you go back to the actual sitemap over here, you can also filter this content. If we want to filter this content, we simply click right here and we can specify, okay, I only want to see certain types of data. And that way you can fine tune and look for specific elements in that HTTP that you're interested in. In this nugget, you and I have answered the question, what tool can we use to see the nitty-gritty detail that happens between a client browser and a website? And how can we manipulate those requests and then see the exact response based on those changes? And the answer, my friend, is Burp Suite. It's included in Backtrack and Kali. It acts as a proxy. It's not intended to be a man-in-the-middle attack, but more of an analysis tool so we can strategically go to websites and content that we want to and analyze the responses that come back from those servers. I've had a great time. I'm glad you joined me. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.